at the State Library of New South Wales. I would like to traditional custodians of the land that some of us are meeting on today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that each of the participants is from. Welcome to this hangout today as we hear from Library's Incubator project people, Laura Damon Moore and Erin Beatty-Kafer. This follows a seminar in May looking at makers, craft and public libraries. Library's Incubator project were mentioned on that day, and we thought it was really important to hear from them. Welcome also to the libraries who are participating via the hangout today. They are Parramatta, Sutherland and Waverley. Welcome to the other people who are watching live online or catching up with this later on. If you are tweeting about this or posting to other social media, please use NSWPLN 2015. Now it's over to Laura and Erin. Thank you.
All right. Are we all set? Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to go for it. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's good evening for us over here in the States. But we are thrilled to be here talking with all of you about creativity in libraries and sort of what we do as part of the Libraries Incubator project. So what I'm going to presentation that we have, so hopefully all of that will work flawlessly. Please bear with me if something irks along the way. All right. All right, Erin, I'm going to ask you to let me know when things look good.
Okay.
All right, are we set?
Looks good on my end.
Fabulous. Okay, hopefully everybody else can see what I'm looking at. The name of our presentation today is Introductions to Ourselves. First of all, thank you for today. Okay. Is this okay?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so shall I proceed?
A bit of echo.
Sorry, what was that?
I think Parramatta keeps dropping out, Laura. You were breaking up earlier.
Okay.
We're gonna.
And there's a little bit of echo going on, but I think we can live with that.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure how to compensate for the echo. All right, okay, so can I go ahead?
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, sure thing. All right, so here today we have Erin Beatty-Kafer, who will be speaking second in the program. She is the programming librarian at New Canaan Library in New Canaan, Connecticut. And then I am Laura Damon Moore. My position is director for the Eager Free Public Library in Evansville, Wisconsin. And my on programming and outreach for library users. founders of the Library as Incubator project, which we will talk more about shortly. Okay, so the plan for this session, since I always sort of like to know what's coming up, we will introduce the Library as Incubator project. We will provide a quick introduction to the book, The Artist's Library, which is a book based on the Incubator project that came out in 2014. We will share examples of artists who use libraries in their creative process. And these are all based on examples that we've shared on the library website. And then since we are all sort of hands-on folks at our libraries, we will also share ideas for being an artist's library. And then there will be time, as Erin mentioned, for question and answer at the end of the program today. So please be sending us your questions, and some of them may get answered along the way. But yep, we'll have plenty of time for. So the Library is Incubator project. The thrust of the Library as Incubator project is that it supports the belief that the library is a place to connect and create. The project began in 2010 when Erin and myself and our Christina were all students at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Library and Information Studies. Since 2010, it has grown into a website, which launched in 2011. And on the website and then through presentations and other media, we collect and share stories about library and arts partnerships. So the main question that we are looking to answer with the project is, do artists use libraries in their work? And if so, how are they using them? And how can libraries support their creative process? So in addition to the stories that we share, we also collect and share kits and program examples for librarians to use in their own libraries. Right, so I mentioned our book earlier. Suggestions and ideas for artists on how to engage with your library. And then some hands-on exercises for readers of the book to The book was written for artists and library users. Since, we are all librarians, we also wanted to make sure that the information was useful to library staff members. So we created a downloadable program guide, which is available on the Coffeehouse Press website, the Artist Library page. And in this in your own library with your libraries. Okay, so now we're going to share some examples of our use libraries in their creative process. So this is sort of how the incubator project was born, by talking with artists about how they use libraries and what they need from their libraries. All right, so this example here is Stephen Crow. He is a visual artist and graphic designer who currently lives in France. He's American. And the project that we talked with him about was a project called Await in Progress. And this was an undertaking he did to illustrate moments throughout Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. So that is, of course, a notoriously difficult text to get through. And Stephen talks about the impetus for this project as an outgrowth of having illustrator's block. So he didn't really have a new project in mind, sort of inspiration, and so he turned to this text that he hadn't revisited in a number of years, and decided to dive into this book and view it through the lens of illustration and how to make the text come alive through these digital illustrations. This whole project is documented on a website called Wake in Progress, if you search for that online. And you can see either most of or all of the illustrations now in his collection. So I haven't checked on it in a while, but he was pretty far along when we spoke with him a couple of years ago. So I would imagine that he's nearing completion. All right, our next example is a book artist and multimedia artist named Cheryl Sorg. And the projects that she does, you can sort of see in the pictures here, are all based on actual text from books, and she has some magazine-based projects as well. But basically, the two pieces that you see here are both spirals using the actual text from two novels. The one on the left-hand side is Moby Dick. So it starts, I believe, in the middle with Call Me Ishmael and spirals outward to create this gorgeous, huge sculpture that people can interact with directly. The right is a floor sculpture, I believe, and that is text from Murakami's Wind Up Bird Cry. So again, it starts very small and minuscule in the center there, and the text gradually grows outward as you move along toward the edges of the bird. All right, another book artist here, Ragnhildur Johans. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Artist who uses discarded library materials as the basis for her book sculpture. So you can see this wall-mounted book sculpture here. These are all using library books that are no inspiration from the Brooklyn Art Library in New York. And this project, people are able to pay for a sketchbook to be sent to their home, and then they create all sorts of different things inside these sketchbooks. You can see just an example of the variety of things that come back to the library. So then the sketchbooks, when they are all filled up, they are sent back to the Brooklyn Art Library to be included in the library's permanent collection. And the library also occasionally tours these books. So the sketchbooks will actually visit cities around the country, around the U.S., and make stops in communities at libraries. And there are often workshops of one kind or another, drawing workshops and sketchbook making workshops and things that coincide with the collection's arrival in the city. Okay, this is a very interesting music project that was inspired by this little book that you see here called Vegetable Verselets. An associate professor of music at Virginia Tech found poetry collection libraries special, and she wrote a collection of art songs based on the short vegetable-inspired poems that were found in this book. Right, and I think I won't link right here, but if you search for vegetable verselet, the professor actually talks about this project and I believe plays some of them. Some wonderful examples of individuals who use libraries in one way or another as inspiration and as part of their creative process. But what does it mean on the other side of the table as librarians? What does it mean to facilitate a library that offers this type of creative space for people? They could be professional artists, but they could also just be dabblers or people who maybe used to make art, or young adults and children, and lots of different populations and types of users. So we have some recommendations that we sort of consider to be the tenets of a creative library. So the creative library offers programs and provocations. So what we mean by that is programs as in workshops or classes, sometimes taught. Provocations is sort of my term for passive programs, just because I think it, I don't know, doesn't belittle the amount of time and effort that both staff and the users put into those experiences. So that might be an interactive art exhibit or exhibition in the library's entranceway, or it could be just an art making station with coloring pages and colored pencils that people can do sort of on their own time, and they don't have to show up at the library at a specific time and be done at a specific time. It's really on their own schedule. So sort of related to the first thing is the creative library encourages exploration. It especially encourages people to investigate and have experience with new art techniques or new subject. The idea that people would explore a new thing once at the library and then either return to try it again and get more information, or go off on their own and explore on their own time and develop their skills that way. The creative library leverages the stuff that's already in the library, the collections of books and DVDs and music and local archives and special collections and things like that. So you put those collections in a space where artists and creative people will see them, to help make connections between collections and these creative venue. Now this could be, you know, just a table set aside for art making. It could be a performance space. It could be a space for people to share poetry and music and other types of art. It could be an art gallery space, things like that. So Erin will talk a little bit more about that later. And then the Creative Library facilitates creative partnerships between the library and its community. And we have an idea that we call programming as collection development that Erin will go into more in depth in a little. Leveraging the people who are already in your community to make innovative programs. And then last but very much not least, I think that an important part of facilitating the creative library means that you yourself are curious and creative and open to new ideas and new ways of doing things and offering services, and not being afraid to sort of re-examine what your library is doing and how they could do it better and vibrant and exciting for your community. Start point, programs to help users get creative in the library. We have a couple of examples. When we first put this together, it was during Poetry Month, which here is in April. And so a lot of libraries were doing this kind of programming in April this year. The first is Blackout Poetry, and basically that means taking a sheet of like a book page with existing text on it and going through and redacting or taking out all of the words that you don't want in your poem. So it's an interesting way to try poetry writing, especially if you're not a trained poet or you haven't done a lot of it before. It makes it very accessible. The other type of hopefully, or maybe you've seen this before, but it's a really fun way, especially to engage young adults but also adults, people of any age, I think, and explore the collection a little bit in a different sort of way. So obviously you can tell that you end up with a stack of books where each book spine is a line of a poem. So, so this one would be, "It's my life, you know where to go." This, oh, I don't know what the rest of the words are. Will be useful to you, I think. So lots of good examples of book spine poetry out there on the internet for sure. Okay. All right. Another cool program that we wanted to highlight today is a program series called the Creative Class at the Washington, D.C. Public Library. And this project, I believe, was cross-stitch monograms that they were making. And they have a series of sort of hands-on, crafty art-making programs for adults. And I think that's one thing that we're definitely seeing in our work is an increase in the number of creative programming for users who are 20-somethings, 30-somethings, 40-somethings, sort of before you get users who are retired and might be more regular library users. You're attracting those slightly younger users with these hands-on programs. Okay, another the New York Public Library. And Handmade Crafternoon is hosted by Jessica Pigsa, who's a rare books librarian at the New York Public Library. And she actually also is a dear friend of the Incubator Project. She wrote the foreword for our book. So, and we really love the work she does. So she and a guest host lead a hands-on workshop that's inspired by collections in the library's rare book on a zine project and looking at examples of zines from the library's zine collection. So with these programs, Jessica is able to tie in some good information literacy development with people. So saying, you know, here's what this collection is, here's how to find it, here's okay. Other ideas for library services for artists. Just as you might do outreach to schools or daycare centers or retirement homes, you can also outreach to arts organizations or craft guilds, other art groups in your community to ask what they need or want from the library. You can offer these groups tours of the library and see if they'd be especially interested in a particular collection or a particular area. Maybe if a quilting guild wants to visit the library, you can and if you have access to digital collections, you can show them how to access those and things like that. So a similar idea is the research workshops for artists. So you know, targeting these arts organizations and seeing if they on a particular research workshop. And then career workshops are also something you can do. So this would be resume or CV making, networking workshops and events for artists and you know, possibly art gallery owners or people who are involved with different art venues in the community. So to make sure, you know, help facilitate connections between art makers and then the people who are showcasing these. Be grant applications can be a real bear sometimes, so libraries can offer workshops on those topics. And again, I do want to mention that we're not, you know, recommending that libraries necessarily, you know, make sure their staff is well versed in how to create an arts resume or an arts CV. Or be an expert in grant writing. These would be times to survey your community and see if there's university staff or sort of other local experts on these topics that can come in and do a workshop in the library, sort of on the library's behalf. But you don't have to be an expert in all of this because that's just too much. . 。  . 。 . 。 . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . 。 . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . 。 . 。 We also just to touch on the exploration piece again. So maker spaces is a very sort of big topic in libraries right now, and we really feel that you do not have to have a dedicated or permanent room as your library's makerspace. So we encourage you to make some room in your library, but it could just be a table that's dedicated to maker type activities. We encourage you to find your partners. We've said it before and we'll say it again. So survey your community, see who the sort of makers are in your community, whether that's a local woodworking group or quilting guild or local pottery group, things like that. See if they'd be willing to come in, do a demonstration and maybe a short hands-on activity for people to get some of that consistent and available. So that might just mean having one day a month or it might be outside of the library in the parking lot or out in front of the front doors or something like that. But just so that people know when these opportunities are available and how to access them. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, who is going.
Okay, who can hear me? Hopefully everybody can hear me because I'm talking now. Good, okay, hi. So I think a problem that we have when we talk about these kinds of things is that people get a little overwhelmed because in some ways it can feel like a total overhaul of services. So what I'm going to try and do is help break it down a little bit into some more real-world examples that ground all of these things in sort of recognizable professional library practice that's going to make your job and any potential pitches to wary bosses easier. So our examples here are graduated in terms of scale. They include things that you can do next month with a little bit of planning and little or no funding, all the way up to the types of things that we call the platonic ideal of the creative library. Things like artist residencies or collaborative projects that make librarians and artists partners in creating new work. The Book to Art Club, which you see here on this slide, is one of those awesome entry-level ways that you can bring hands-on explorations to your library by integrating them with a tried-and-true program model that's both recognizable and beloved. Nobody's ever going to get rid of the book discussion in a library. The Book to Art Club is our riff on that classic library book discussion, which we run as a sister site to the library's incubator project. You can find us at booktoartclub.org. The site includes ready-made book club kits for both adult and YA titles that lend themselves well to creative explorations, and these kits cut out a lot of the work that goes into planning book clubs and hands-on projects. Our tagline for the club, which takes place in chapters all over the world, is Read, Talk, Make. And that's exactly what happens at Book to Art Club meetings. The example that you see here on the right is from the East Branch of the Milwaukee Public Library, where they created vintage postcard collages as part of their discussion for the book Where'd You Go, Bernadette? The Book to Art Club is a great springboard, I would say, for more in-depth creative programs in the library, because the projects that the Book to Art Club has are easy to do. They don't require skill from your readers, from your book club participants. just an interest in trying some stuff out as part of a discussion. It's sort of very low pressure. And the projects are cheap. You can you tend to be able to crowdsource them from, the YA librarian's craft cabinet. And we've actually seen really interesting things happen to the discussion itself when the book is a book to art club title rather than just a book club title. When you read a book, knowing that it's going to be part of an art making project, you read it differently. You pay attention to different things, and what results is usually really interesting and deep discussions of aspects of the book that aren't the plot and aren't like, did I like this or not? You might say that you paid attention to the atmosphere or the way color was used in the text because you were considering what you might make in a book to art club discussion. So it results in a unique reading, sometimes a more sensitive reading, and that can be a really useful way into a text that is difficult. Similar to Stephen Crow, who Laura talked about with his Wake in Progress project. Sometimes making the art is a ladder into the text, and you can get beyond a discussion that's just, I did not like this book, and here's why, or I thought it was weird when this character did this. You can have a deeper discussion of, okay, so how would I illustrate this part of this book beyond whether I liked it or not? So it's a really interesting thing that happens. Hey, Laura, can you advance the slide? Thank you. Another way to test drive creative library practices is to consider the cool stuff that you already have in your collection and consider how you could create an entry point into those collections through hands-on projects. As librarians, we already do this kind of work all the time. We not only collect books and databases and other resources, but we also work to make sure that people know about them and know how to use them. So we create displays, we make handouts, we host workshops on databases or genealogy subscriptions. But what if you did that kind of work and you also considered how people might use a resource or a collection creatively when you considered how to tell them about it? What if you considered a creative entry point? Hey, Laura, advance the slide. Great.
Cool. I think I did a tad too early.
Okay, we're good. One brilliant example of this work comes to us from Jessica Pigza, who, as Laura said, is Rare Books librarian at New York Public Library. Part of her job is outreach. It's making people in the community aware of the important works in New York Public Library's collection, the research collections, and making sure that they know how to access those things, how to find them, how to use them. So her Handmade Crafternoon program, which we just touched on briefly, runs monthly on Saturday afternoons, and that was one way that she made those resources accessible. She tied them to creative projects. Her book, Bibliocraft, which is on the slide right here, is the result of that work. Bibliocraft is basically a primer for how to find inspiration for handmade crafts in the library stacks. The projects were created by Jessica and a team of designers that she has worked with in New York, either through the craft scene or in the research library, and each one comes with a materials list and a directions list, just like you might expect from another sort of craft how-to. The interesting thing is that they also come with a comprehensive list of resources for makers to explore more. It's both digital collections and physical books, physical collections that you can visit. They're listed there along with subject headings and search tips for how to find that kind of stuff, both online and in brick and mortar libraries with the help of research librarians. And that teaches not only a little bit how to find things in good vetted sources, but also how to make creative use of a library collection easy. And if you're reading it from the perspective of somebody who's looking to provide access, that's a really interesting way to break down a collection, is what can I make from it? The project that you see here on the slide is Jessica's Rumlines wall hanging, which is based on the extensive collection of nautical maps in the Rare Maps room at New York Public Library. And Jessica just loved the geometric lines that are a part of those maps, and she designed this embroidered indigo wall hanging as a way to sort of engage with those images that she had come across in her research. So the moral of the story here is that every library has weird or interesting things in the collection, and every library has librarians who are good at connecting people with information. So if you just think about your target as an artist who wants to make something, that really informs how you're going to connect them to that stuff. Bibliocraft is a great primer on how to do that. Get the next slide. Hey, Laura, next slide.
Oh yeah, it's up there. Should be.
Okay, great. Fluxus Club is another example of that sort of entry point making. And it comes to us from the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. The Walker has an impressive collection of early Fluxus writings from the 1960s when the art movement was just getting started. So Fluxus is sort of a difficult movement to talk about. It was basically a cadre of international artists and composers and designers who blended media, and sometimes it's called intermedia because of that. And all of that sounds kind of dry and esoteric, and it's hard to talk about, but it's really interesting if you just do it. So rather than having gallery walkthroughs, what the Walker Art Library did was they collaborated with the rest of the Walker Art Center around a show about Fluxus to actually invite people into the library space and rebrand it as a making space rather than a browsing space. They hosted an open house where the Fluxus publications that are part of the collection were out and available, so you could actually see them rather than them being, you know, locked away in the archival section. And then participants were invited to explore the act of Fluxus, how making intermedia objects sort of contributed to this larger conversation about what is art. So the project that you see here on the left involved a scavenger hunt series of directions to find books on the shelves that were different colors, and then they used templates that you see with the circles to create Xeroxed poetry pages from that text. And the resulting poems are these strange and wonderful snippets of color and language that are very similar to what Fluxus artists created in their publications. So people were actually engaging with the idea of Fluxus by creating something new in the library space, all leveraged based on these collections and how to best connect people to them, and the ideas there. All right. So another way to consider the creative library is not through collections, but through space. Making the library a performance venue does not have to involve special lighting or stages or anything other than open space and the opportunity for people to gather around art that they're interested in. So this is a series of photographs from our friend Brandon Minokian. His work at the Princeton Public Library is a perfect example of library as venue. His Page to Stage series brings short plays to life in the library space, and as you can see, sometimes on the library grounds. This particular series of photos is from a production of Einstein's Dreams a couple of years ago. So his productions are stripped down theater. They can take place anywhere there's enough space. It's on book, which means that he can use student actors and allow them to get experience, which is a great community service. And when the production is held in the community room rather than outside, it's essentially black box. There are no costumes, there isn't a stage, there aren't any props. But Brandon has actually said that those kinds of limits make him a better director. He's more creative when he's creating theater outside of an actual theater, in a space that's not built for theater, with all of those bells and whistles. So both he and his actors have to tell a story, and they have to communicate with an audience with very limited resources. All they've got is their bodies and their voices. So it's a really interesting experiment, and it's so, so useful. The library space becomes this crucible for creative expression, and it pulls out better performances and also creates theater in a space that is very accessible. The library space is democratic. People who don't go to the theater still go to the library, and so they have this opportunity to engage with an art form that maybe they wouldn't seek out on their own. So it's really interesting, and Page to Stage is one of our favorite examples. This past spring, I actually had the pleasure of working with Brandon and his creative partner, Katie Fraser, at my library in New Canaan, Connecticut. Every March, we do a community read. We call it One Book New Canaan. This past year, that book was One Summer America 1927 by Bill Bryson. And the book is full of really fascinating portraits about baseball and boxing, jazz and prohibition, all sorts of things that were happening around 1927, which was sort of a landmark year in American history. There was Lindbergh's historic transatlantic flight. There were all sorts of sort of celebrity and disaster culture things happening. And it's a really interesting book, but it's a history. And for some people, it can be really dry to read history, even when it's presented in Bill Bryson's like witty prose. But because I knew that Brandon liked to work with libraries as a director, I reached out to him and asked if I sent him a copy of Bryson's book, could he write an original play that brought some of those stories to life in a tangible way that people could watch and engage with? So he and Katie worked together to produce a really hilarious script called The Murder and Booze Cabaret that mashed up vignettes of characters and history from Bryson's book with jazz renditions of like modern pop songs, everything from Britney Spears to Nirvana. It was a really, really fun experience, and it made the library, the librarians, me, the library, collaborators in a new artwork. We worked with an artist to create something new for our community. And it was so well received. We did 2 shows, and they were both sold out. And we were able to partner with a local theater company, so they let us use their stage. We have a stage in our library, but it was much more dramatic to be able to have everybody at the Powerhouse Theater. It was really fun. Hey, Laura, can we get the next slide?
Yeah, it should be up.
Okay. I think I'm on a lag. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
So that is a great example of sort of pulling the library as venue into library as creative collaborator. And this last set of examples is about extending that idea of partnership to artist residencies, which we sort of consider the platonic ideal of the creative library, an artist in residence in a library space. So having an artist or a maker take over a space in your library for a month or two is this incredible way to share their skills with the community and forge creative, collaborative bonds as a professional practice that can benefit both librarians and the artists. Artist residencies in libraries are understandably rare because they usually require resources that some of us don't have access to. But more are popping up lately as many libraries sort of consider how they're going to share hands-on experience of information in the library space rather than just passive access to information. So experience versus access is sort of the linchpin difference here. Artist residencies can happen in a variety of ways. So here we have a couple of different examples to share. On the left is Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh with their artist in residence at the Hazelwood branch, which is part of a larger partnership with the local arts council. The council sort of pairs artists with community sites, including libraries, in neighborhoods all over the city for month-long residencies that engage teens and the broader community in workshops and performances. On the right, we have a slightly different example. Same outcome, different structure to support it. At Madison Public Library, their residency is coordinated and funded in-house as part of their makerspace program, which is called the Bubbler. Local artists are contracted to take over the Bubbler room. They live there for 6 weeks, and during their stay, they lead workshops and design drop-in projects that contribute to a library artwork that's displayed in the library space while it's being made. And then afterward, once the artist's term is over, their library stays. Their library projects stay. So those two things are just serve as examples for how artist residencies can have a structure around them to support them. But there are many ways to get artists into your library. Right now, we're hoping to create a database of library residencies for artists so that we can share more examples and best practices as more and more libraries sort of consider how they're going to do experiential learning rather than simple access. So if you know of a library artist residency, please get in touch. We're making a database right now, and it's a great way to share your stories. Okay, so what I want to leave you with is a more philosophical approach and a way to codify all of these examples of providing access to experiences of information rather than just resources. And we call that programming as collection development. It's a way to kind of take these practices of supporting creativity in the library space, making the creative library a thing, by putting it in professional context, by saying, when we build programs, we're considering them as part of the collection. We assess them regularly. You know, we don't just take things because they're free, because that would be tantamount to only stocking your shelves with self-published stuff that had been donated. That's not part of a library's practice. So why is that sometimes the way that programming happens in a library space? We should be considering programming from a holistic point of view. And one of the ways to do that is through partnership. And by assessing all of the programs that you're providing as a spectrum, are we hitting all of the areas that we cover when we develop a nonfiction collection, for instance. If we were going to shelve a program, would we be able to shelve it on every stack in the library, or are we missing something? Are we not providing access that is hands-on and participatory in the sciences, or in music, or in dance? And how can we rectify that? How can we make the connections in our community that are going to bring those experts in to share their knowledge in an experiential way? Because I think all of us are cognizant of the fact that there is information out there in the world that cannot be cataloged and put on a shelf in order to connect people with it. It's got to be in person. It has to be active. And our jobs as librarians, if it's to provide access, if it's to connect people and information, this is simply an extension of that job description. But it's far more active, and it requires applying the things that we know from developing collections into partnership building. So I hope that you'll take that, you'll consider what programming as collection development means and how it has an impact on your practice as a librarian, as a professional, and really use that to advocate for the necessity of considering programming librarian as a separate job description. Collections developments librarian tend to be different than a reference librarian. Programming librarians are doing similar work. It's kind of the cross-section of collection development and outreach. So I hope you'll take that as a grounding idea, as a grounding tenet moving forward, and start to apply that in a way that supports creativity and making in your library space, because that's where the active and participatory learning happens. Next slide. All right, we've got a nice list of where to go for more ideas and more ways to interact. We will be able to share all of this once we advance the slide, so don't feel like you have to write everything down right away. But we want to make sure that you can connect with our sister site, which is the Book to Art Club. That's an easy entry point for how to make hands-on stuff connect to really recognizable programs as a jumpstart, as a springboard into other kinds of programming. MakeItAtYourLibrary.org is a great resource. We also highly recommend Jessica Pigsa's book Bibliocraft and her blog Handmade Librarian. ProgrammingLibrarian.org is a great resource for all sorts of programs and how-tos from librarians across the world, particularly in the United States. I contribute to it sometimes as a writer. Makerspaces, there are a couple of different Facebook groups that we really like. Programming Librarian Interest Group and Makerspaces and the Participatory Library both have people who are really active in this scene, and it's a great way to crowdsource ideas. And then we have a few Twitter friends that we really like following because it's a great conversation online and it's really active. So we always like to give a shout out to the people who have contributed stuff to our website and have been a part of the conversations we have while we develop these ideas. So give them a little follow, see if they're up your alley, and let them know that we sent you. And finally, we are happy to take your questions, and we hope that this ends up being a good springboard for you, a way to connect. We are always on Twitter pretty much all the time. So if you come up with a question later that you didn't get answered today, or you're working through some of these things in context in your library, you want to ask a question, we'll answer it there. So please feel free to connect. And if anybody has any questions, we are happy to roll with them now.
And I just want to add one more thing too. If you have love to hear about that. So, you know, if not today, then by email to our email address. It's libraryasincubatorproject@gmail.com. And there's submission information on our website as well. So we welcome your ideas and would love to hear what you're up to. All right, I'm going to escape out of this now and go back to
questions from the libraries that are in the Hangout first. Any questions from those libraries? If not, we've got a couple of questions. Oh, yep. I can't tell. Just go ahead with your question.
Hi, I'm just wondering what's the response from the community been with the Artist in Residency project?
I mean, I'm building an artist residency at my library right now, and based on my experience at Madison, people loved it. It was just one of those things, you know, the bubbler room was right there, it was right at the entrance. There was always something different happening in there, and people would make a point of stopping by the library just to see what was going on. People loved it, and I think if you set it up right, and you know, there was strategy involved in that. The first artist in residence was handpicked. It was not an application process. The people knew and trusted this person as a really engaged, sort of community-focused artist who was interested in doing a project that would be sort of ongoing and collaborative. And so, you know, like when they were building that, they kicked it off with somebody who's going to set the tone and sort of make that artist in residence idea very obviously participatory. And he had an extra long run in that space. I think he was there for something like 2 or 3 months. Successive artist residencies are much shorter, but he was there and he was able to build this platform of social media engagement around the project that has carried over into other residencies afterward. And that was a strategic move. It was very well received. People anticipate the next artist when it comes in. So I'm hoping to build something similar at my very small library in Connecticut based on the success of that program, because I got to witness it while it was coming together.
Could you elaborate on what sort of social media engagement they did then, or what worked well?
Yeah. So the guy's name was Victor Castro. He is an international artist. He's a sculptor. He uses recycled materials only in his sculptures, and he hashtagged the hell out of everything. He would do little kid projects and take pictures and encourage the parents to take pictures of the project, and everywhere he went, he just branded everything with this bright yellow paper that had the hashtag on it and the Twitter and Instagram handles, and every time somebody made something, he'd say, hey, share it, you know, and they'd pull out their phones or do whatever they were going to do, or he would share it on his phone if they didn't have that. And in the bubbler room, which was sort of home base, like he went to the other branches of libraries and did workshops, but his home base in the bubbler room at the Central Library had a digital screen that was up, and it streamed anything that had that hashtag applied. So it was pulling from all those social media spaces. So if you walked through the brick and mortar library, even if you were not online not following that hashtag, not part of that conversation, you were seeing the result of it. And it was simultaneously engaging people, sending people to the website where he was talking about how he needed more donations of recycled materials for his projects, and people responded. But it was also documenting his work. So, and that was a grant-funded project. So when they came to the end of that, they had to report back to the grantors, how did we spend your money? What was the upshot of this? They had a raft of pictures, really good ones, of every single stage of the project, because people had shared it the whole time. And it didn't feel like work. It didn't feel like documentation. It just felt like participating in a cool project with your friends. It just felt like being a part of a community. And it was incredibly, incredibly smart. It's a great template.
Great, thank you.
So we've got a question.
Well,
Did you
I
get?
think you're cutting in and out.
It might be easier
So
if
this
you
is
type it. Would it be possible to type your question in, and I can read it because you're breaking up?
It's on the chat.
Oh, the question about other library departments?
Yes, that's the one.
Perfect. Helping people wrap their heads around the different way of thinking about programming is sort of step one. And as soon as you frame it in a particular, and I think Erin really nailed it by saying, we as librarians, you look at our collection and we try to find holes and gaps and where those need to be filled. And if you then translate that to programs, I think it's cool. So I think, if anything, it's just a reframing. It's not this entirely new way of thinking. You're not starting from scratch, I guess. You might be filling holes in here and there. So if you look at your collection and say, oh, hey, we have a lot of gardening books, but we've never done a gardening program, maybe that's a good way to start that. Then I think people are very open to that generally.
I also think there's a lot of hesitation from people because they think you're asking them to do something that's not their job description. As librarians, we are overworked and underpaid globally. That just seems to be how we work. And so a lot of people get a certain level of fatigue. Like, you're going to ask me to do what? Like, seriously, what? I got to learn how to unplug the, de-junk the MakerBot again? Is that really part of being a librarian? And so, this kind of a shift can be really frustrating for some people who have just, hit their level. So I think just figuring out how to communicate this as this is the same thing you're already doing. The product is just different. You already know how to make a really deep collection that responds to our community's interests and also gives them access points to stuff that maybe they don't know they're interested in yet. That as a collection development librarian. That's already part of your job description and part of your skill set as a professional. All we're doing is saying, hey, what if we made a collection of programs that allowed access that information in an active way rather than a passive way. It's the same skill set, you're just collecting different stuff. It's, you know, it's the same transition as moving from collecting only print material to collecting digital and print. And it's the same bitch that happened with that, too. It's like, oh my God, I don't know how to assess this. Well, yes, you do. You really do. And you're proficient. You are already proficient in assessing these things. You just have to frame it in a way where they already feel comfortable and they feel like they have the skills, rather than putting it as, we're going to do this new thing, and they're like, oh shit, another new thing, right? I really think it's a framing issue.
All right, I see another question came in from about writers or poets in residence, and that's a really good question. I don't think either of us have tried that personally from an organizing standpoint, but we have a lot of cool examples on the website. I think if you just search for writers in residence on there, you'll find some really neat examples. I think, is it Boston Public Library that has a really cool? Yeah, yep. Boston Public Library has a writers in residence program, and we've talked with a couple of their residents before.
Yeah. It's an amazing program, but it is funded, so it's like 9 months. The writers stay there for 9 months. It's called Children's Writers in Residence, and they get like 20 grand and an office in the library. So it's like a really excellent template that's scalable. Writers in residence are a great way to go because you usually don't have to buy the materials. If you're doing a painter in residence, they're going to be like, okay, where's my materials budget? And you're like, that tube of paint costs $40. So writers in residence are easy. They tend to not need materials.
Okay, looks like we've run out of questions, and I guess it's my turn to just thank Laura and Erin from the Library as Incubator Project for their time and for sharing so many great ideas and inspiring all of us to think quite differently about what we can do in our library spaces. In particular, I guess I really liked the idea that the library is a place to connect and create. I think that's something that everybody can take away and think about how they can do that locally. A big thank you to the Reference and Information Services Group who made their YouTube channel available to us to live stream and also to post this. To everyone who's joined us live on the Hangout and via Twitter. And if you're in particular the Library's Incubator website, so you can find out lots more information. So thank you to Ellen for setting up this opportunity, and thank you so much, Laura and Erin, for sharing so much with all of us.
Of course.